Hello, everyone. This is Haben Girma speaking, and I'm deafblind. I'm using a braille computer and keyboard to access information. So there's a bit of a delay between when someone speaks and when I respond because communication is coming through. And I'll give a visual description. So I'm on stage with a small computer that has braille along the bottom. For those of you who know blind tech, this is called a braille note. And on the floor beside me is a German Shepherd seeing eye dog named Milo. And he's been trained to assist blind individuals. He was specifically trained for blind individuals, not deaf-blind individuals. But he's really brilliant. So he adapts, and he also gives me auditory cues and environmental information, in addition to his blindness training. I grew up in San Francisco Bay Area in California. My parents are from Eritrea and Ethiopia. I was born deaf-blind, and my parents did not know about Braille or sign language or even Helen Keller. So there were a lot of unknowns. How would a blind child learn math? How would a deaf-blind child go to school and get a job later? A lot of people in our community would say, "Poor thing, she'll never go to school, she'll never get a job." Those beliefs are ableism. Ableism is a system of beliefs and practices that say disabled people are inferior to non-disabled people. We're not inferior. Everyone is different. Disability is part of the human experience. But ableism has been so widespread that a lot of employers assume that disabled people can't do jobs. And people who design apps and websites assume that blind and disabled people would never be able to use them. Those assumptions, those practices are ableism, and we have to learn to resist ableism. I slowly learned to resist it. It took a lot of work. When I was in college, I was doing really well in school. And most of the students around me were getting jobs. And I, too, wanted to get a job. But none of the employers wanted to hire me. One of my friends told me, "I know where you can get a job. Alaska." Alaska is a cold, distant corner of the United States. But I really wanted a job, so I went up to Alaska. And they were right. There were lots of summer jobs, and I sent in my applications. The employers were impressed with my grades at school, my volunteer experience, and they'd call me in for interviews. As soon as I came in, they noticed I was disabled, and they'd come up with all kinds of excuses not to hire me. These were tactile jobs, jobs that didn't require sight. Washing dishes, folding laundry. When I was growing up, my parents made me do chores, so I had lots of experience in these fields. But employers still assumed that you have to see to wash dishes. My disability did not stop me from working. It was ableism that stopped me from working. The assumptions that disabled people are incompetent, that was the problem. And I did not know many deaf-blind role models, so I was really scared. If I can't even get a job as a dishwasher, what would I do with my life? I didn't have the answers. I kept trying, kept applying to jobs, kept getting rejected. Then through a friend of a friend, A manager believed in my abilities and hired me to work the front desk of her small gym in Juneau, Alaska. And that summer, I learned a lot about gym equipment. A woman came up to the front desk and said a treadmill isn't working. I followed her to the treadmill. I put down my white cane, and I felt the machine from top to bottom. Near the bottom, there was a switch. I flicked the switch, and the machine whirred to life. She told me, "Oh my goodness, I didn't see that switch." I told her I didn't see it either. Sometimes tactile techniques beat visual techniques. We want employers to know that disabled people are talented. If we can't see the button or switch, we'll feel the button or switch. Disabled people are talented, and we need to fight ableism, the beliefs that only able-bodied people can be successful. That's the problem. Those beliefs are the problem. We need to remove them and instead believe that disabled people are talented. So I decided to help fight ableism, and law school was one way to help build up my skills so I could fight ableism. I applied to law schools. Harvard told me they never had a deaf-blind student before. I told them I've never been to Harvard Law School before. They didn't have the answers, but they were willing to engage in an interactive process to find the solutions and make it work. So I graduated from Harvard Law School, and I had more skills then when I graduated to help fight ableism. And one area where ableism was spreading was on the internet. A lot of companies were building websites and apps and not thinking about disabled people. I really love books, and when I was growing up, I would have to wait weeks for a book to arrive in the mail. As digital books became more widely available, blind people were eager and excited to be able to read books on their smartphones and on the websites. But a lot of these digital libraries were not accessible. I represented the National Federation of the Blind, an organization of blind people in the US, to make one specific library, Script, that was the name of the library, accessible for blind readers. Script told us, no, they don't have to make their library accessible because they believed that the Americans with Disabilities Act only applies to physical places, not digital spaces. Their library was digital, not physical. I disagreed with them. My team disagreed with them, and we filed a lawsuit arguing that they are violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. They fought our case. It went to court, and the judge ruled that the Americans with Disabilities Act does in fact apply to online businesses, to virtual places. And after that, the library, Script, agreed to work with the National Federation of the Blind to make their library accessible for blind readers. So more books are now digitally available for blind individuals. And it's an example of one way of changing our internet, our tools, so that more people have access to information. A lot of websites and apps are not accessible, and we call that the information famine that's facing blind people around the world. Text starts out as ones and zeros. Programmers have the power to convert those ones and zeros into engaging graphics, audio, support for Braille, and maybe one day smell and taste as well. The tools for doing that have been around for a long time. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and Android and iOS accessibility guidelines. Ableism means a lot of computer programs, computer science courses are not teaching about accessibility, and we want to change that. For deaf-blind individuals, access to the internet has been life-changing. I can't overhear conversations in the real world, but online, when conversations on social media, on email and texting, when all of those apps are designed for accessibility, then I and other deaf-blind people have access to social information, employment information, education, and health information. It's absolutely life-changing. So I'm going to continue using my skills to help advocate for greater access online. The biggest barrier is not my disability. The biggest barrier for me and many disabled people is ableism. And I am hopeful more people will join the movement and helping to fight ableism so that disabled people have equal access to digital information. During my time in Kenya, I've been here for a few days. I've heard that the process of making tech accessible is very, very expensive. And sometimes it's hard to pay attention to stuff like tech when you are struggling to gain access to food and water and shelter. That's absolutely true. It's also true that we need to take a global perspective. If people have access to information, then they're more likely to be able to help themselves and their communities to get education and employment, which solves the struggle for basic necessities. So we need to take a global perspective, and access to digital information is a critical part of that. I know a lot of people have questions, and Enable has invited me to open it up for Q&A so that I can help best address whatever questions that come up. The system we're using for Q&A, I have an assistant who uses a keyboard, and he will be typing what's being said. And our MC has graciously offered to help pass around a mic for anyone who wants to be able to ask a question. So you can raise your hand and let us know if you have a question.
Any questions? All right, we have a question here. Kindly, let's pass the microphone.
Can I ask the question? Go ahead.
All right. Would request that they kindly, whoever is answering the question, to kindly go to the stage so that we can be able to. All right, the students, please come. Esther, please arrange. Let's have people come to assist us to get on stage so that we can be able to answer these questions. And for purposes of coverage, we'd like to also see the person who's contributing. So we'll kindly request that you join us on stage. All right. So in case you have a question, please join us on stage. Those who have questions.
So I am using the keyboard and braille computer. One possibility is also to share the keyboard. So if those of you asking questions, if you're okay with it, I'd love for you to use the keyboard. We have 2 people up here.
Thank you very much, Haben, for that sharing experience. This is Eric Ngondi with United Disabled Persons of Kenya, UDPK, and also proudly that I was sponsored to be here by Enable. And I have a question, and the question is, in your experiences, how can we use the digital environment, the digital space, to champion the rights of persons with disability and build a stronger movement? For example, how do we use issues like hacktivism and such thing to champion the rights of persons with disability, especially within the movement or within the organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs? Thank you.
So digital information also includes stories. Social media, news programs are all online. And the biggest barrier for me and many disabled people is ableism. One way to resist ableism is with stories that spotlight disabled people. Disabled people working, learning, playing, showing that disabled people are multidimensional. So let's elevate and amplify more disabled experiences, especially disabled people in Kenya and throughout Africa. Let's amplify those stories on social media and news programs. That'll help teach more people that disabled people are part of the digital world. We're also online, and many who are not online want to be online, so they have access to these conversations. And then the other piece is to teach creators to make their content accessible. So teach news programs to include sign language interpretation so deaf people have access to videos. Add captions to videos. So teach news programs and creators and influencers on social media to add captions to their videos. And the other piece is to have image descriptions. Photos are all over the internet, social media, websites. And if they don't have image descriptions, then blind people don't know what's in them. Some are photos of cats and dogs, but others are important health announcements, important flyers for your school or workplace. There's a lot of critical information that's put in photos, and a lot of blind people are locked out of that information. So let's teach creators to add image descriptions to photos, captions and transcripts to videos, and make sure videos also have sign language interpretation. Excellent question, Eric. Someone's typing. My name is Pauline. I have 2 questions. Number 1. How did you learn how to speak? I'll answer that one, and then we can move on to your second question. So deaf-blindness is a spectrum. Many disabilities are not black and white. There's a spectrum of abilities. So when I was younger, I was deaf-blind, but I had more vision and hearing, and it's decreased over time. And having more hearing when I was younger helped me develop my speech and learn to speak. I have a higher register voice, and there are lots of communities that dismiss high register feminine voices. There are also lots of communities that dismiss people who have an accent, or people who use sign language, or people who use computers and assistive devices to communicate. Sexism and ableism often intersect, and it's up to all of us to help create communities where all voices are valued, regardless of whether it's a high register voice, whether there's an accent, or one is using sign language. We need to make sure we're making space for all kinds of voices. And second question, do all colleges have the facilities to train deafblind in the USA? I would argue that all colleges around the world, all colleges in Kenya and USA have the ability to train deafblind people. When I was looking for colleges to attend in the US, I applied to several schools, and one school told me, "You know, we don't have any Braille. I'm not sure we can get your books in Braille. You know, it snows here. How are you going to get to your classes in the winter?" They were extremely discouraging, and I felt like they didn't want me there. And if I accepted admission, they would be fighting me and refusing me access every stage of my college career. I chose not to go to that school. I went to a different school. The school I went to said, "We've never had a Braille reader before. You're our first Braille reader." But we did some research, and we found out there's a device that will produce Braille. And they purchased a Braille embosser. They purchased translation software, and their reading specialists took time to learn how to produce Braille. That was a choice. They chose to learn and be inclusive. Another school in the US chose not to learn, and instead were pushing me away from the school. So it comes down to choice. Whether it's in the USA or Kenya or China, it's all about choice. Ableism says disabled people can't learn, and we have to learn to fight ableism. I've been saying ableism a lot, and I want to spell it out. ABLEISM. It's the concept that one's worth is dependent on being able-bodied. And if you're not able-bodied, you're not valued in society. So that's the concept of ableism. And it comes up in schools, on the internet, in workplaces, and it's a lot of work to fight it. You have to choose to do the work to fight it. And some schools choose to do it, other schools don't. Great questions, Pauline. Hi, Haben. This is Karan. Kaja. How can other disabled people help fight ableism? When I started out in my journey as an advocate, I was very focused on deaf-blindness. It's what I knew, and a lot of people start out with what they know. Then I was engaging in cross-disability conversations and events, and I learned so much from those experiences. I strongly urge disabled people to engage in cross-disability experiences. Learn about disabilities different from yours. Form community, friendships, mentorships with disabled people different from you. We're stronger together. There are digital spaces that bring disabled people together when those digital spaces are accessible. And there are also local communities that work to bring disabled people together. So, given the tools and community resources you have, try to form community with other disabled people, including those who are different from you. Hi, I'm Chung Kim with Google. In the US, we have the ADA to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act for people with disabilities. How can we enforce disability inclusion laws in African countries? Google is an American company, so it's subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So as long as Google is paying attention to American laws, I think we'll be okay. And Africa has many different communities where cultures are different, needs and expectations are different. I'm wary of opposing my views on communities that are different from mine. But I strongly encourage communities to have cross-disability conversations and ask, do we have access to what we need? Do we have access to digital information? And do the work necessary to ensure access happens. A lot of that advocacy is on the shoulder of disabled people. We also want non-disabled allies helping to advocate. Non-disabled allies can start by listening. Listen to what disabled people in your community are saying. And after listening, act. Process what you've heard, and then take action. Once you've learned what needs to be done, you should be able to start doing it and notice the access barriers. Notice ableism so we can remove it from our communities.
So maybe we can have the last question.
Okay, this is Shadrach from Dasuns. I would like to know more about your device. Does it connect to the internet? Can you can it display pictures and other information from the internet? The way blind individuals access pictures is through image descriptions, also known as alt text, alternative text. So it is a description. For example, if someone took a photo of me, the alt text might say, woman standing at a podium, German Shepherd guide dog lying down on the floor beside her. So that is an example of alt text. So if I'm using my device and browsing Instagram or an email, and someone includes a photo, I would read the text description to know what's there. Most images don't have text descriptions, so it's a struggle to gain access. I'm reminding creators and news organizations to add alt text image descriptions. And social media companies have tools that allow you to do that without impacting your character count. So Twitter has a feature for alt text. Facebook does as well. So those are ways to ensure that your images are accessible to people. So that was a long way to answer that yes, my device can access the internet. It can use Bluetooth to connect to a smartphone or laptop. My device is just one of many dozens of different types of Braille computers. There are smaller ones, bigger ones, some with more features. So there's a variety of them out there. They are expensive, and there are researchers working to make affordable Braille. It's the quest for the Holy Braille. And I know there are universities here in Kenya. Maybe we can encourage the universities here to join the quest and try to help create more affordable Braille so more blind people and deaf-blind people have access to Braille and digital information. All right, I'm told that was the last question. Thank you for listening. You've been very, very patient. And I want to point out my way of communicating is considered slower than the mainstream way of communicating. And it's traditional to dismiss people who are too slow. That's ableism. So part of accessibility and inclusion is adapting to all the different ways people connect and communicate and access the internet. Throughout the conference, I'm going to try to be outside the room to meet with anyone who wants to say hello or ask more questions. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.